Let me click remove for you. And then I need to do the video. Right, so we're live. So let me just do the video thing. Hi everyone, and welcome to another stream with me, Azure Greg. It's been at least a couple of weeks since I did one of these, so I've probably forgotten everyone. So apologies if I click all the wrong buttons. Tonight, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined with Seif Bassem. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, Seif. He's going to talk all about Azure Arc JumpStart. This is a project which I've not really spent any time looking at. Shame on me, because it's something I do want to look at. I really need to make some time. But without further ado, let me add Seif, how are you, sir?
All good, all good. Thank you for having me on this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for coming on. This is a wee cheat I've got. I want to learn things, and I find people who teach these things and talk about these subjects. So I'm like, right, we'll do a stream, and I'll learn and ask questions as we go.
Definitely.
Right. Do you want me to share your screen and we'll just jump straight into it? Would that be
yes.
the way to go?
Let's do that.
Oh, let me do. What do I need to do here? I've forgotten how to do this. Let me do it again. Add to stage. Right, there we go.
Yeah.
Right, I will take us off so that it's just your slides. Right, if you want to come back on, we can do that. So, right,
sure.
Fire away.
So my name is Seif Bassem. I'm a cloud solution architect. I work at Microsoft. I'm also part of the Azure Arc JumpStart team, which is why I'm here to talk about it. You can find me on Twitter mainly, or X now. I prefer still to call it Twitter, but I'm there. I have my own blog where I post tips and tricks around Azure and around other cloud stuff. And also I started recently a YouTube channel again, mainly YouTube shorts, 1 minute tips and tricks around Azure and new stuff in Azure. So you're definitely going to find me in all of those places. But today I'm mainly going to talk about Azure Arc JumpStart. So let me move. Okay. So before I jump into it, I'd like first to talk what is Azure Arc before I talk about the Azure Arc JumpStart, just for those who are new to Azure Arc and don't know what Azure Arc is. So usually with Azure, maybe 5-6 years ago, most of the discussion was around migrating to Azure, and you would migrate to infrastructure as a service, virtual machines, or you would modernize and migrate to more PaaS and SaaS services. But as we work with customers and partners, there were some workloads where it was a little bit challenging to move to the cloud, at least immediately or at that time. So this became a dilemma for some customers where they're missing on the value that the cloud brings in terms of security, management, monitoring, governance, and all of those cool things that you would get from the cloud, because for some reason they had to stay on-prem. So this is usually how most organizations are at the moment. So you see that environments continue to grow in complexity with a lot of new technologies, platforms. Lots of organizations now are adopting multi-cloud strategies. So you would usually find at least one or more cloud providers. So a customer would have maybe an on-prem data center. They have some workloads in Azure. They have some workloads in AWS or GCP. And at the same time, they have thousands and thousands of applications running across all of this diverse infrastructure. So they have branch offices, as I said, multi-cloud, they have IoT devices, edge devices, retail stores. So all of this adds lots and lots of complexity in terms of managing this whole environment. So the main challenges that we see customers is answering a couple of questions. So with this type of diverse infrastructure, how do they answer how do we meet regulatory requirements? If we're talking about the financial industry, a lot of banks needs to comply with PCI DSS regulation. So if they have on-prem workloads, they have Azure and maybe other clouds applications hosted there, and all of those needs to comply with the PCI DSS regulation. How do they do that? How do they enforce it? How do they measure the compliance? How they can say we're 95 compliant with PCI DSS? Most probably they're going to have to use multiple tools across those different platforms. Most probably they're going to have to scale up their people across those 3 different platforms. And the security teams as well, they're going to have to look at the risks, look at the security tools and capabilities, again, across all of those platforms. So this introduces lots of challenges. At the same time, if we look at another spectrum of the organization, which is innovation and developers. So it's basically the same discussion. So how they can enable the developers to bring value faster when they have different platforms. How do they deploy to Azure, and how to deploy the same application to on-prem? And again, how to deploy this application into Kubernetes, into Google Cloud, and how to host the database layer in those 3 platforms. So this usually slows down developers, and it requires them to not focus 100% on their code, but focus also on how to deploy their code to those different platforms that the organization is adopting. Another challenge is, again, security. So how do you manage access control across all of this? How do you manage threats across all of this? Again, with multi-cloud, multi-platforms, multiple types of applications, you would have different threat matrix. You would have different actors, you would have different tools, you would have different things that you need to look at. And again, all of this falls mainly on the security team that needs to be educated across all of those environments. And finally, how to govern across those environments. So how do you enforce your configuration, your security controls across all of this? So usually in the old days, the security team would you would have maybe a on-prem data center, you have some servers, they would run some of their tools to scan for vulnerabilities and then share this with the poor IT folks who would need to go through tens and tens of pages of vulnerabilities and security configuration. So multiply this by 10 when you're not just having an on-prem data center, but you have multiple cloud platforms, multiple types of infrastructure like IoT devices, edge. You have Kubernetes clusters, you have virtual machines, you have PaaS services, you have different types of databases, open source, something like SQL, RDS on AWS. So it's very challenging for customers to be able to look after all of this and try to gain competitive advantage. So this is where Azure Arc comes in. This is why Microsoft has created Azure Arc. So as you can see from the diagram, Azure Arc sits on top of all of this. So if we take those questions and we just move them a little bit up over Azure Arc, this is where you would get answers and where you would able to control all of this across environments. You'd able to manage, secure and govern all of those apps infrastructure from just one place. If you'd like to enforce regulatory requirements, you just enforce it from one place. It does not matter where your infrastructure is located, whether it's on-prem, on Azure, on another cloud provider. It does not matter whether you're running some apps on a Kubernetes cluster in Azure on AKS or Kubernetes cluster in GKE, the Google Kubernetes engine, or in AWS. It simply does not matter. It does not matter for security folks. It does not matter for developers how to deploy this code. It mainly abstracts all of this complexity, all of this diverse set of infrastructure to give you a single control plane that allows you to manage, secure, and govern all of this across the environments. So this is a very, very quick high-level view of why Azure Arc exists and what problems does it solve. To move a little bit into, we understand the value, what kind of services that Azure Arc provides. So Azure Arc has lots of different types of services that are available that customers can use. And if we start from the bottom again, it's the same story. It's hybrid and multi-cloud, hosted anywhere. We do not care where your applications are running. And then Arc provides mainly two categories of services. You have Arc-enabled infrastructure and Arc-enabled services. So the Arc-enabled infrastructure is really, you have your Windows machines, you have your Linux machines, you have your Kubernetes clusters, you have your SQL servers. They're already hosted and running happily in some place. What you need to do is just manage them as if you're managing the rest of your Azure resources. So on Azure, you manage the VMs, you apply tags, you protect them with Defender for Cloud, you monitor them with Azure Monitor, with SQL the same, with Kubernetes cluster, you use Defender for containers, Azure Monitor for containers, you apply GitOps. I'm going to talk about this in a couple of slides, but you're missing on all of those capabilities by hosting those workloads on-prem. And again, it might be 100% valid that you need those workloads to be on-prem, maybe due to latency, due to regulatory requirements, etc. So with Arc-enabled infrastructure, you do not miss on all of this. What you need to do is just connect or onboard those workloads to Azure Arc, and then all of the known Azure services that you would use, like Monitor, Defender, Azure Policy, and tagging, Sentinel, all of those kind of capabilities, you bring them to wherever you're hosting your workloads. So you can secure your servers cluster SQL with Defender. You can monitor them with Azure Monitor without having to migrate or move your workloads to any cloud. The other category of services is Arc-enabled services, which is maybe the other way around. So as you can see here, those are well-known icons for Azure services like App Services, Azure Function, Logic Apps, SQL Managed Instance, Machine Learning. Let's say that you're already using those services on Azure, or you want to use those services, but since they've been always on Azure and you needed to migrate, you're not able to use them. So with Azure Arc, you can take those services and actually deploy them outside of Azure on your hardware, on your infrastructure. So you can take Azure Functions and deploy it in AWS, or you can take it and deploy it in your data center and provide your developers with a managed PaaS service. And at the same time, this is totally running in your data center on your hardware, wherever you'd like them to run. They're not running in Azure. Similarly with data services. So you'd like to modernize your data layer instead of having a Windows server and installing SQL and managing high availability and managing the upgrades, which sometimes take hours or days. You just want a managed SQL instance. So you can take SQL managed instance and again, deploy it on-prem and get this managed service, but again, running on your infrastructure. So Microsoft takes care of patching, takes care of upgrades, high availability is there, and all you need to do is just deploy it and then point your applications to consume this service. So this is in a nutshell what Azure Arc is, what problem does it solve, and what are the services that are available. This slide is a little bit old. There are other services that are offered as part of Azure Arc and other that are coming soon, but those are the main foundational services that Azure Arc is well known for. So Now, as we understand Azure Arc, let's talk about, let's shift gears to the Azure Arc JumpStart. And so with all of those capabilities, why is there is a project called Azure Arc JumpStart? So with all of this, we've noticed some challenges with customers and IT professionals who are starting to trying to adopt Azure Arc. So as I mentioned in almost all slides, it's targeting not just on-prem but multi-cloud. So you'd have AWS, you have Google Cloud, you have other types of clouds. So in the Microsoft Docs, it's a little bit challenging to talk about other clouds specifically, or show architecture diagrams of them, show screenshots of how to use them, how to, for example, onboard the SQL Server to Azure Arc that is hosted on AWS. You cannot have this kind of content on Microsoft Docs. So it has been a little bit challenging for customers to visualize and have step-by-step guides on how we do this on AWS. At the same time, the docs are ARM focused, so how to deploy things. Of course, now this has evolved. You have Bicep, and in some docs you have Terraform as well. But at that time, it was mainly ARM focused, which, as we all know, ARM is a little bit complex to read when the templates get a little bit bigger. So, and of course, customers who adopt multi-cloud usually use Terraform. So there was also a gap there. It's also sometimes challenging to contribute. So you can, for example, submit a contribution for a typo, or you would like to add additional section. But again, it was not that easy for people to contribute. Maybe there is a new scenario on deploying Azure logic apps on-prem using Azure Arc. So it can be a very big scenario, which was not 100% documented in an easy to digest way. At the same time, working with customers, hybrid is a little bit confusing. So lots of customers are confused by what hybrid means, and asking questions, do we need to migrate stuff to the cloud? Okay, so how do we deploy SQL managed instance on-prem? How does it look like? It's very challenging to visualize because Arc is a little bit unique, because it, as we've seen, it touches a lot of Azure services, and at the same time, it's a new concept where we're taking an Azure service and we're deploying it somewhere else outside of Azure. So you need to touch it, you need to see it, you need to deploy it to be able to understand what value does it bring. And finally, it's there are lots of information. So you'd find different blogs, different people who adopted this earlier. They would try to build some stuff. So there was this sprawl of knowledge around Azure Arc once it was introduced. With that said, the Azure Arc JumpStart project, it started in around 2020. And what it does is that simply it provides a supermarket experience where you want to adopt Azure Arc, you want to ramp up on Azure Arc, you want to experience Azure Arc, instead of jumping in the docs and trying to get some information from here, from there, from a YouTube video and from a blog. You would go to the JumpStart project and you would find every type of Azure Arc service, and you would find different scenarios for each service. So let's say where we want to see how to onboard servers to Azure Arc. You would go to Azure Arc enabled servers, you would find a scenario for AWS, a scenario for Google Cloud, you would find a scenario for VMware, you would find a scenario for even local virtualization environment, you would find a scenario, I think, for Alibaba or other types of cloud. So as a customer or as a learner of this technology, for every type of scenario that might come into your mind or your organization is facing, you would find step-by-step screenshots, automation that would allow you to quickly ramp up, quickly demo, quickly play with this technology and have everything configured for you, so it can get you faster to adopting this kind of service. The cool thing also about Azure Arc, it's open source and community driven. So we have lots and lots of people who contributed scenarios, and I'm gonna jump to the portal to just walk you through what I'm discussing. But mainly we have lots of contributions where people from the community, they would contribute, they would build scenarios, they would fix some stuff, they would report some problems. And it's open source, meaning that lots of open source technologies we're using and integrating in our scenario. So it's not just Azure, it's not just Microsoft. In the next slide, I'm going to show a sample of some of the open source projects that we already have within the scenarios that we have on the JumpStart project. On the right, the logos that you see are mainly the products of this project, the JumpStart project, as it evolved. So we first started with the JumpStart, which is the group of scenarios, and then we have ArcBox, we have Agora, we have HCI Box. Again, I'm going to talk about all of this and show some demos, but you also have a YouTube channel where we not only talk about Arc and JumpStart, we actually talk to some folks from the product groups of the different Arc services. We have also a series with actual customers and partners talking about their experience. So again, if you're new to Azure Arc, you would like to learn what others are doing with Azure Arc, you'd like to hear new announcements from the product groups, this YouTube channel has lots and lots of videos. So again, I'm going to talk about ArcBox, HCI Box, and all of those boxes in a sec, but I just wanted first to show some of the open source projects that we are using in JumpStart. So you'd see Grafana, you'd see Weaveworks, GitOps, you'd see Kibana, Rancher, Ansible. So lots and lots of open source stuff. So again, we're not just limited to Microsoft technology, but we're also adopting open source projects and including them in our scenarios. So with that said, let me jump to the JumpStart project just to walk you through. But Greg, do you have any question, or do we have any question to answer before jumping to the demo?
Not at the moment. No. I think everybody's just really enjoying the session, so I'm getting comments like this. So
perfect.
Amazing. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Learning lots.
Okay, perfect. That's great to hear. So now I'm going to walk you through each bit of the JumpStart project. I'm going to start with the scenario. So as you go to the JumpStart project website, which is aka.ms Azure Arc JumpStart, where you're going to find the main sections are scenarios, Agora, ArcBox, HCI Box. For now, let's just focus on the JumpStart scenarios. So as I mentioned, there are lots of Azure services like servers, SQL Server, Kubernetes, data services, app services, machine learning. All of those technologies that I've shown in the slides, you're going to find a section for each of them. So let's first, for example, say that you're mainly a DevOps engineer. You have Kubernetes clusters in different locations, different platforms, different clouds, and you'd like to learn how to use Azure Arc to bring value to manage, govern, and secure those Kubernetes clusters. So if I go to the Arc-enabled Kubernetes cluster, you're going to find the section for onboarding. So how to actually onboard an existing cluster to Azure Arc. And in this scenario, you're not just going to find step-by-step, but you're going to find automations and scripts that would allow you to do the onboarding. So as you can see, there's a GitHub repository that I'm going to show in a sec. And it hosts all of our code, all of our guides, and also the automations that we have. So we would take you step by step using screenshots. You don't have to have an environment set up. All you need to do is have a subscription, an active Azure subscription, and we are going to provision those resources for you and then take you to the whole journey. So all you need to do is just an Azure subscription and some prereqs that we walk you through in each scenario. And then as we've talked about Kubernetes, you're going to find different types of scenarios. So you're going to find Red Hat OpenShift. You're going to find AWS Kubernetes servers, Google Kubernetes engine, Alibaba, even local. If you just want to deploy a Kubernetes cluster on your laptop or on your machine, and you want to onboard this to Azure Arc, you're going to find scenario to do so. So just to give you an example, if I go to the Google Kubernetes engine, we're going to use here Terraform. So we actually have screenshots how to prepare your Google Cloud environment, how to create the necessary permissions and credentials. And then we provide a Terraform code that allows you to provision Kubernetes cluster on Google Cloud and then onboard this to Azure Arc, and then you can start playing with it. So even if you don't know a lot about Google Cloud, your company decided we're gonna use Google Cloud, let us know or educate us how to create clusters and onboard them to Azure Arc. You just need to follow this step by step, and then it's at the end product is going to be having a Kubernetes cluster on Google Cloud, and this cluster is Arc enabled, and you can see it in the Azure portal and start interacting with it. So this applies to everything. So not just Kubernetes, but Arc enabled servers. Again, you're going to find VMware environments, you're going to find Google, Vagrant, Azure Stack HCI. So the scenarios are the lifeblood of the JumpStart project. This is where we've put every scenario that you can think of. We've put in a huge amount of documentation, step by step, a lot of very cool automations that just allows you to go from zero to hero in just minutes. So this is the scenarios. This is the first part of the JumpStart. Before going into the other parts, I'll just jump back to the slides to just show the other products or the other solutions that we have as part of the JumpStart project. So the evolution of the scenarios became something called ArcBox. So the scenarios are great. You have very distinct types of scenarios that we walk you through, but what if I'd like to have, I want to do a demo to my company, or I'd like to do a demo to a customer, and I need to have multiple scenarios in just one package. I don't want to deploy a Windows server and then a Linux server in another environment and do things manually. I just want a package with different scenarios in one place where I can demo, learn, and showcase this to customers. So we created ArcBox. So basically, ArcBox is a sandbox environment. You can think of it as an accelerator for proof of concept. So with one click, you can deploy a full demo environment with everything set up for you, with most of Azure Arc capabilities already enabled. So in maybe 30 minutes, you can get a full-blown environment with clusters, with servers, Windows, Linux, and you can have Defender, Monitor, all of those Azure services created. And at the same time, you have a step-by-step guide, not only how to deploy it, but actually how to demo it, how to talk to it, how to explore it. And today I have very, very cool demos that I'm going to show you for some of those ArcBox use cases. So in ArcBox and mainly in JumpStart in general, we have some design principles that we, using generally available or public preview capabilities, we try as much as possible to provide a lot of deployment options as possible. So we have Azure ported deployment. If you're not an infrastructure as code person, you just want to click deploy to Azure and that's it. We have an option for that. We have ARM templates, we have Bicep, we have Terraform. We're using PowerShell, we're using Bash. So regardless of where you're coming from in terms of experience, you're going to find a deployment method that suits your needs. And we recently started to incorporate Azure Developer CLI. I know maybe last month you You had the live stream around Azure Developer CLI and how cool it was. So we're also starting to incorporate that so that you just run AZD up and then you have ArcBox deployed for you.
Seif,
Yep.
we have a question. Do you mind if I just pop the
Sure.
question up? Right, let me just do that. Yeah, now we make a good time.
Okay, let me. Yeah, okay. So the question is mainly talking about onboarding GKE into Azure Arc. What type of control do we get? Does that mean we can monitor, enforce compliance? What else we can do? Yes, that's a great question. So any Kubernetes cluster, any supported distribution of Kubernetes that is supported with Azure Arc, once you onboard this to Azure Arc, you're able to enable Defender for containers on it. So meaning that you can enforce regulatory compliance and monitor for it. You can deploy Azure Monitor for containers, so you can see the nodes usage. You can see the CPU of the nodes. You can see the number of pods, the failures, etc. You can actually apply Azure policies. So you can, let's say you want to deny any container that gets deployed on your clusters that have a vulnerable image. So you can actually, there is an Azure policy for it. If you assign this policy on a resource group that has AKS cluster, Arc-enabled Google Kubernetes clusters, AWS clusters, any developer that tries to deploy a vulnerable image to any of those clusters are going to get denied. So you can actually have control within the cluster. You can even use Azure Active Directory or now Entra ID to enforce authorization within the cluster in terms of namespaces, etc. So you can do much once you onboard your clusters or your infrastructure to Azure Arc. Okay, perfect. With ArcBox, since we were talking about servers, clusters, SQL managed instances, etc., it's hard to just have one concise package that includes all of this. So what we've done is that we've created flavors of ArcBox. So let's say you want this full package, this big package. You want to have a sandbox environment that has Windows, Linux servers onboarded to Arc, have Kubernetes clusters onboarded to Arc. You want to deploy PostgreSQL and SQL managed instance on-prem or outside of Azure. You want to see all of this in one place. So you can go ahead and deploy the full flavor of ArcBox. This is gonna give you everything, and I'm gonna show you in the next slide an architecture diagram so you can visualize how this would look like. And then we have scenarios where, no, I'm just an IT professional. I look after servers, Windows, Linux, SQL. I don't care about Kubernetes or data services. So we have IT pros for you. This flavor just deploys Arc-enabled servers and SQL servers. So you just focus on that. This is what you're interested about. Also DevOps, from the name, it's focusing on Arc-enabled Kubernetes. So actually, this is the ArcBox that I'm going to demo today. So you have different scenarios on what you can do with Arc-enabled Kubernetes. And finally, ArcBox for data ops. So this is focused on the data people. So how to deploy Arc-enabled SQL managed instance outside of Azure. What kind of capabilities do you get? So you would see the high availability. You would see how applications would connect to the SQL managed instance. We have sample apps deployed in there so that it's not just theoretical. You actually have an application that is inserting and reading data from this SQL managed instance that is deployed outside of Azure. So in those ArcBox flavors, you not just look at Arc technologies, but we've put a lot of other stuff that makes it feel like a real life scenario. You get custom application we've developed. You have open source technologies like Grafana. And again, I'll walk you through some of those scenarios. So for you to just visualize what you get when you're deploying ArcBox, if we look at the full edition, this is what we actually deploy for you. So as you can see, it's fairly big. If we look at the right first, you would see you have 4 servers, 2 Windows, 2 Linux, 2 Ubuntu, and we have another Windows server that has a SQL instance inside it. As you deploy this, all of those virtual machines are going to get deployed, and they're going to get onboarded to Azure Arc. At the same time, you get a Kubernetes cluster that is based on an open source project called Rancher. So we deploy this for you. Even if you don't know Kubernetes, you don't have to. This gets deployed for you and gets onboarded to Azure Arc. And finally, we deploy Arc-enabled PostgreSQL and our SQL managed instance as well on top of a Kubernetes cluster. So as you get all of this deployed, we enable monitor, policy, defender, and we've included some experiences that help you learn and also demo the capabilities and the potential that Azure Arc brings to the table. I'm not going to get into that much of details, but this is how you actually deploy it and what actually gets deployed. So you can use Bicep, you can use ARM, you can use Terraform to deploy this. And this is just showing on a more detailed what kind of, how do we do infrastructure as code and what actually gets deployed and how it gets deployed. So if you're interested on our JumpStart project, you're going to find those kinds of details if you're interested to learn how we're doing this. This is IT Pros. Again, as I mentioned, it's a slimmed down version of the full. It's just focused on servers and SQL. So you get the same stuff, but without Kubernetes, without data. It's much smaller, and it's mainly focused on servers and SQL servers. Again, this is how it is the automation flow and what gets deployed. DevOps. With DevOps, we deploy for you 2 Kubernetes clusters using 2 distributions. So one is using Rancher, which again is an open source project, and one is using something called Cluster API. This is a project started by Microsoft that allows you to build a Kubernetes cluster on top of a group of virtual machines. So the reason we have 2 clusters is one cluster we configure everything for you, and the other cluster we have some guidance in our documentation that guides you through doing things yourself. So you can think about one of them is pre-deployed, pre-configured, and the other one is a playground where we provide additional scenarios that you can play with yourself so that not everything is configured for you. And as you can see, there are additional capabilities that are deployed here, like GitOps, Open Service Mesh, Key Vault, and secret management. And hopefully we'll have time to demo some of those stuff. The last flavor is the DataOps flavor. And this is mainly targeted towards maybe DBAs or data folks. What we do here is we actually deploy or simulate 2 sites. So we simulate a primary site where you deploy an Arc-enabled SQL managed instance, and we configure high availability for them. And we have another site within ArcBox so we can simulate a disaster recovery. So lots of DBAs were skeptical when the SQL on containers discussion started, I think some years back. And you have to demonstrate the power of this solution. Of course, having SQL on containers, there's a huge discussion and debate around it. But with Arc-enabled SQL managed instance, you get high availability, you get disaster recovery, you get automated backup, automated upgrades. It's always evergreen. So using this ArcBox, you're able to simulate all of those capabilities. If you'd like to get the buy-in of your DBAs, you can deploy this. We have step-by-step guide how to simulate a failover, a local failover, how to simulate a disaster recovery or a failover to another site. And we deploy an application. We show how developers work with it. We even show how to domain join or how to use local Active Directory authentication to log into those SQL managed instances. So it's the full set of capabilities that you would like to have in a managed SQL server that is deployed and controlled by you. So this is a very cool flavor that you definitely need to try. Okay. So with that said, let me actually take just one of the Arc boxes so we have time to show you how it looks like. So I'm gonna first go here. And I'm gonna go back to the portal, to our JumpStart project. And I've just navigated to ArcBox for DevOps. Just to show you how to use this. So first, you're going to get the architecture diagram that I've shown. It's going to talk a little bit about the capabilities that Arc-enabled Kubernetes provide, and it's going to explain what do you actually get, what toys do you get in this ArcBox. So you can see that we have two sample applications that we deploy for you. And this is just an explanation of how those applications are architected, and I'm going to show them to you. So we have a Hello Arc application, which is a Node.js, and we have a bookstore application that is developed in Go language. Then we go through the main capabilities, and then we walk you through how to deploy this sandbox. As I mentioned, you can see lots of different ways to deploy it, depending on your needs and requirements. I've already deployed it, so I'm not going to deploy it again, but just walking you through the depth of guidance, step-by-step scripts, automations that would make your deployment as smooth as possible. If I go down, the one thing that I'm interested in is this section, which is using ArcBox. So now, after you deploy ArcBox, you need to, now let's experience Azure Arc. What kind of things that I can do with Azure Arc? So there is Key Vault integration. There are a lot of stuff, but what I'm going to show is actually, this scenario. So what I'm going to show now is that I have a Kubernetes cluster that is deployed and is onboarded to Azure Arc. I have an application called Bookstore that is deployed on this cluster. What I want to do is that I want to control the traffic. So I have a version 2 of my application, and I want to say now I have 100% of my traffic going to V1 of the application. I want to have like just 25% of the traffic to be routed to V2 so that I can get feedback from my users, and then in phases I can switch 100% of the traffic to V2. So this is something that you can do with Open Service Mesh, and since we've Arc-enabled our cluster, we can use this capability to control the traffic. So this is what I'm gonna demo right now. So I'm gonna go to ArcBox. This is mainly a virtual machine in Azure that we deploy everything. So this is when you deploy any of the ArcBox flavors, you're going to get a client virtual machine and a bunch of other resources. But this is where you mainly manage and go through the scenarios. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just open my bookstore application. So let me just So this application simply shows that it's simulating people buying books from my store, as you can see here. And you can see that all of the traffic is going through V1. All of the purchases are going through V1. I have 0 purchases from V2. And if I open the other one, you can see this is the V1 and this is the V2. So as you can see, customers are still purchasing from V1. So what I want to do is, What I want to do is, I want to control this from Azure Arc. I want to control the traffic from Azure Arc and distribute this. So first, what I'm going to do is all of the commands that I'm going to run are in the documentation. So you can follow the same and do the same demo that I'm doing at your own leisure. So this script that I've run is just showing the purchases or showing the requests that are going through my applications. And as you can see, they're all V1. I don't see any V2 purchases. So what I'm going to do is, since we're using Open Service Mesh and we're using GitOps through Azure Arc, I'm able, as a developer or as a DevOps admin, I'm able to just describe my application or my Kubernetes cluster configuration in GitHub, and any change that I make here is going to automatically propagate to my clusters. So I don't need to learn AKS, I don't need to learn anything. I just provide my configuration here, and then this is going to propagate directly through Azure Arc and through GitOps and Open Service Mesh to my cluster. So if I go here, sorry, I have a YAML file that describes the traffic split. So again, you don't need to understand this. In the guidance, you're going to find more details. But as you can see, the version 1 has weight 100 and the V2 0. So that means all of the traffic is going through V1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this a little bit to maybe make it 75, 25. And I'm going to commit this change. So all I've done is that I have changed a value on a YAML file hosted in GitHub. As a developer or as a DevOps engineer, I don't need to know anything about the clusters, whether they are on-prem, whether they are on Google, whether they are on AWS. All I need to do is just work on GitHub. So through GitOps, through Open Service Mesh that Azure Arc Kubernetes enabled, all of this traffic is going to flow there and switch to V2. I just remembered something that I forgot to configure this to look to my repo. So most probably it's not going to work as expected. So apologies for that. But if you go through the guidance, you would provide your GitHub user, and this is going to allow you to make the changes and then see them reflecting here. So it was a mistake for me to forget to configure it correctly, but so I'm going to just skip this and move on to another demo. But this is explained in the JumpStart project here. You can go step by step and you can see how to configure this and how to make this work. So just to show you how it works, you will change the value as I've demoed. Sorry. Yeah. And once you change this, you're going to start seeing traffic going to V2. This happens in just a matter of seconds as the cluster picks up the change that you made in GitHub. And then only 25 of the traffic starts to go through V2. So this is what you would be able to experience and demo to your developers and DevOps engineer. Again, the value prop here is your people do not need to learn all of the cloud providers. They don't need to learn different Kubernetes distribution. They just need to work with the tools that they're accustomed with. The other thing is that you can apply this consistent configuration, deploy all of your application from GitHub or Azure DevOps or any other type of version control, and this gets propagated across your fleet of clusters wherever they are hosted. So this is the main value prop of Azure Arc, and specifically here, Azure Arc Kubernetes. So this is just one of the scenarios. You're going to find other scenarios here like Key Vault integration to manage certificates for your applications. You're going to find enforcing RBAC configuration to control who can delete pods, who can create pods, etc. Again, all of this you can control centrally from a GitHub repository, and this propagates across your clusters. So this is just one quick demo around ArcBox. The other flavors are going to have other types of demos, so definitely try to deploy at least a couple of them, experience them, go through the docs, and learn around the Azure Arc technologies available. The second iteration or the third product that we have is HCI Box. So HCI Box is it's like an ArcBox, but for Azure Stack HCI. So we've seen lots of customers who are adopting Azure Stack HCI in their environment, and there has been lots of challenges in terms of online. There has been lots and lots of guides on how to deploy Azure Stack HCI for demo purposes and learning purposes. So you would need to have a very beefy machine. You need to configure networking on Hyper-V. There has been lots of different GitHub repositories that started with some lab guides. Some of them were awesome, to be honest. But through time, there has not been a lot of maintenance to those repos. So the experience got a little bit broken. You would get very low percentage of success. And at the same time, if you manage to deploy HCI, you don't have end-to-end automation on how to use this with Azure Arc. So Azure Stack HCI provides some integrated Arc capabilities, like creating virtual machines on Azure Stack HCI and manage them from Azure Arc, bringing all of the governance, security, management capabilities to the virtual machines hosted there. And the main thing is providing customers with a sandbox environment to test Azure Stack HCI. Usually you would get hardware, approved hardware, you start to deploy the Stack HCI operating system, and then you configure networking, and it can take a lot of process just to do testing and validation. So with that, what we've done is that we've created a sandbox environment for Azure Stack HCI. You don't need physical hardware. All you need, again, is just a subscription. With a couple of clicks, you can deploy a full Stack HCI environment. And again, as with ArcBox, you get lots of guidance and automation. So how to deploy virtual machines, how to Arc enable them, how to manage them, how to even deploy AKS and SQL managed instance on Azure Stack HCI. So this is how it looks. As you can see, it's a very busy slide, but the main thing here is when you deploy HCI box, you get Arc-enabled servers, you get AKS deployed on Azure Stack HCI, you get Azure SQL managed instance deploy on Azure Stack HCI, and as you can see, it's a very, very big product. It's a very complex product in terms of the infrastructure that we configure for you and how we abstract this kind of infrastructure for you. So all you need to do is just deploy it and then experience those capabilities. So you're going to get a cluster, AKS cluster deployed there. We're going to provide you with an application and experience on how to experience GitOps on AKS, how to deploy SQL managed instance, and how to have a database on it and how to interact with it. So all of this complexity, you don't need to worry about it. We deploy this for you. So the final product, or the latest product that we had announced a couple of months back, I think in August, is what we call JumpStart Agora. So as you see, the development of the JumpStart project has started from scenarios, so distinct scenarios focused on technology, on Arc-enabled SQL Server, Arc-enabled servers, Arc-enabled Kubernetes. And then we've taken this, we bundled some of them in ArcBox. So we have Arc-enabled SQL, Arc-enabled servers in the same box, in the same experience. But again, we're still focused on the technology. How we evolved from that is that we started to think at a higher level. So we started to think for industries, or we started to think for industry scenarios where how do customers and how do organizations use all of those technologies to provide value to their customers. Let's say, how do retail stores use all of this distinct set of technologies and open source technologies as well to deploy their applications to their retail stores, where maybe they have just a very tiny machine, or even a Windows 11 machine that sits in store, and they need to run some applications on it, and they need to run it securely. They need to be able to do multiple deployments per day. They need to monitor it. They need to do lots of things. So what we've done with JumpStart Agora is that we're building a library of industry solutions to showcase and to help you demo all of those moving parts and how to provide an end-to-end scenario for this industry. So what we started with is the first scenario that we've launched in August is Contoso Supermarket, so a retail scenario. In the future, we would have more industries and more scenarios, but this is the first scenario that we've created. So Contoso is a supermarket, and through this experience, we provide real-life experiences that you can try and see within this concise sandbox environment. So as you can see, there are lots of use cases that you can demo. You can see the different services that usually a supermarket have. So they have a point of sale. They have maybe a freezer for food safety. They have for example, they're deploying application, they'd like to use AI at the store. So with all of those scenarios, we've created different use cases, as you can see, like streamlining the software delivery process using CI/CD, data pipeline to report freezer data. So how do we look at the temperature and the humidity of the freezers and how to report to the store manager if something is wrong? Using AI, so how do we look at how busy the store is? What kind of technologies that you can use? So as you can see on the right, we're using different set of technologies. Some of those are Microsoft technologies. Some of those are open source, like PostgreSQL and the OpenVINO inference engine that is doing a little bit of AI there. So for each of those use cases, you can actually go step by step through this experience and see how real life customers are using the technologies. And I'm going to show a demo, a couple of demos of those if we have enough time.
Yeah, we've got lots of time. Don't worry.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so on a high level, this is how Agora is created. So if you look in the middle, this is the supermarket scenario. We have a point of sale application. We have a checkout queue monitoring application that, again, looks at the different queues in the store to see which one are busy. And we have a freezer monitoring solution, so to monitor the health or the safety of the food stored in the freezers. In terms of the technology stack, where we have Cosmos DB, we're using Data Explorer, we're using Container Registry, we're using even Prometheus and Grafana, we're deploying AKS Edge Essentials, which is a slimmed down version of AKS that you can deploy on very, very tiny machines. Like we actually deploy it on a Windows 11 IoT machine. So AKS Edge Essentials is a very, very cool technology that allows you to take the power of AKS, the capabilities of AKS, and actually just throw it on a very tiny machine in a store or in a remote location. So we're using AKS Edge Essentials here. We're also using IoT Hub, automation, and other kinds of services. On the left, you can see some of the operations that we're demonstrating in this scenario. So the focus of this is the developer experience. So how developers iterate with new capabilities and new features, and how they, using CI/CD, how they deploy this to different clusters or even different stores. So as we're going to see in the demo, we're going to have different locations for this Contoso supermarket chain in Chicago, in Seattle, and we're going to show you how those capabilities using CI/CD and GitHub Actions can be deployed safely with testing across those environments. So first, let's look at the architecture, and then I'm going to jump into the Agora supermarket experience and show you how this works in real life. So the first application, this is the supermarket. As you can see, this is just an architecture designed to show you how it works. It might resonate if you are a customer. This might be an actual architecture that you're using, of course, with different services. So as you can see here, this is a customer. We have an application deployed that they can buy stuff. And we're using a Postgres database locally. And then we have like a job that would sync those data to Cosmos DB in the cloud so that we can run some analytics on them. And I'm going to show you this. So as we do orders, as people do orders, I can say how much people have ordered avocados in the last 3 days, for example, or what is the store location that has the most amount of orders being created. And I can do some reporting, some insights so that Contoso Supermarket can enhance their operations. This is the application that we're going to see and we're going to play with. We actually developed this and we deploy this within the sandbox environment. So you just don't get theoretical data, but you actually experience what happens in the real life. This is the reporting or the insight that I've mentioned. This is a dashboard that we created and also included in the experience. So you can see here the percentage of orders by product. So as a store manager, I can make analysis and understand how to refill the products that I have. And all of this is powered by the technology that we're talking about. AKS Edge Essentials, Data Explorer, Cosmos DB, Grafana, and everything that we're going to experience in the demo. The second service that we're going to experience is the queue monitoring service. So this is, again, another application that is deployed. And there is a service that is running on the cluster that monitors the queues, the checkout queues that are available in the store. And we actually have like a video feed that shows people in the store. And we have an AI service that would count the people in the AI in the store. So as a store manager, I can see in real time which queues are busy. Do I need to open another queue to make sure that the checkout process is as streamlined as possible? So again, all of this is deployed into Agora. So this is the queue monitoring application that you have. So you see the number of checkout lanes that I have, which are open, which are closed, and the number of users at each checkout. I can see the shopper wait time and a lot of other statistics that we have. And finally, this is the AI piece of it. So I can enable the store manager to have this live view where I can count the number of people in the store at different queues, so I can make more intelligent decisions on that. And I'll show you how this works in the demo. Finally, the third application is the freezer monitor. Again, we simulate that we have two freezers per site or per branch of the Contoso supermarket, and we're using an industry standard protocol called MQTT to send this telemetry data to a broker, which send this to an IoT hub, and then again we can do some analysis and dashboarding using the Data Explorer. So as you can see, lots of open source stuff, not just Azure or Microsoft technology. There are a lot of technologies available in the technology stack in this solution. So here we're gonna be able to use this stack and use Data Explorer to understand which freezer is damaged or which freezer that needs maintenance using the data that we are simulating as part of this solution. This is another dashboard from a Grafana perspective. So I'm just gonna skip conscious of time. The last thing I want to talk about is the developer experience that we're showing in Agora. So as you can see here, those are the three stores that we have. You can see all of them are AKS Edge Essentials clusters, and we deploy all of this for you. So you don't need to worry about that if you don't know a lot about AKS Edge Essentials. So we have Seattle, we have a cluster in Chicago, and we have a local cluster where developers start to add functionality and iterate and test locally before pushing the changes that they do to the other production clusters. So it mainly looks like this. This is the developer experience. There is an inner loop where developers test first locally, and then they promote the image or the Docker image of the version of the application that they've created to a staging environment, and then some integration testing happens, again using GitHub Actions, and then when the release manager approves those changes, they are pushed to the outer loop, which are the Chicago or the Canary cluster, and then to the production, the Seattle cluster. So we tried to simulate how developers work in real life and how they safely push code. And we try to put some guardrails in terms of code quality so that you can experience a full real-time scenario where a developer is adding a feature or capability to an application from edge to cloud. This is a very busy slide. I'm not going to go through it, but this is basically our CI/CD workflow. So this is how you're gonna, as you deploy Agora, create a new feature in one of the applications and deploy this across every cluster, from local to staging to canary to production. So this is the CI/CD. Those are mainly represented by GitHub Actions. You don't need to learn all of this. All of this is configured for you, and in the guidance we explain this in details. But this diagram just makes a good explanation of what's happening and how we're thinking about CI/CD. And the final piece is the infrastructure. So there are lots of applications, lots of insights, dashboards, but also for the IT folks in the Contoso supermarket, they need to monitor the clusters. They need to look at the performance of the clusters. They need to look at, especially because, as I mentioned, it's a very small Windows 11 machine that is carrying this AKS cluster with the application. So we've created dashboards for the IT folks to look at the CPU, the number of nodes, memory, etc., etc. So all of this we're going to see once we jump into the demo. Finally, this is how we deploy it. Again, here we're using Bicep, and we're also using the Azure Developer CLI. This is the first product that we're using Azure Developer CLI in. So you're going to have very streamlined process in terms of how to deploy it. And as you can see, this is what happens under the hood. This is how we build this whole experience. The code is on GitHub. If you'd like to look at how we're automating CI/CD, how we're automating creating GitHub Actions, how we're creating the Azure resources, configuring GitOps, configuring developer tools, all of this is open source. You can look at it and reuse it in some way. Okay, so I've talked a lot. I've shown a lot of slides. Let's jump into the Agora demo. So again, I just wanted to show you where to get this. So if you go to the JumpStart project, you go to Agora, you're going to find our first industry, our first scenario, which is the supermarket. If you go through it, you're going to find the details that I've explained and the different scenarios that we had. So if you're interested in just the freezer monitoring for food safety, you're interested about IoT Hub, Data Explorer, etc., you would find step-by-step guide with screenshots on an actual scenario, like how do we find a failed freezer, and it's going to walk you through step by step how to interact with the dashboards and how to identify where is the freezer that is at fault located. So with that said, I'm going to jump to the Agora demo. So this is again an Azure VM that hosts all of those servers, all of those clusters. So we create everything for you, as I mentioned, so you don't need to worry about all of this. What I'm going to show here is a couple of those scenarios. So let's first look at let me just open it in another tab. Let's look at the freezer monitor solution. So on the desktop, we have a data emulator. This just simulates having orders so that, before the freezer monitor, let's look at the data pipeline. So this just simulates orders that gets created. So if I go to the Azure portal and go into the Data Explorer, and I'm going to go to my Data Explorer, and open the dashboard. So you're going to find two dashboards, one for freezer monitoring, one for the orders. This is created for you. So if I go to the orders and maybe say for the last 3 hours, now I'm going to see the total orders by date. I'm going to see the order product by count and by location and by product. So those dashboards, usually the store managers or usually at the back office, they'd like to look at this data to understand which products are being consumed or which locations have the busiest number of customers. So this is something that we create for you. You can buy avocados, buy banana, buy milk from the store, and then you would find those records reflected here. As I've shown in the architecture diagram, we use a local PostgreSQL, and then this syncs to a Cosmos DB, and then this Data Explorer instance reads this data and visualizes this for you so that you can see this in real time. And of course, again, this is open source. You can use those dashboards for your scenario if you'd like. The second scenario, which is the freezer monitor, again, we in each location, so in Chicago and in Seattle, we have two freezers. We simulate two freezers, and we're using the MQTT protocol to send the temperature and humidity every second, so that we have a large data point where we can visualize and see where the problem is. So, for example, if I select the Seattle site, I can see that this is the temperature for the first freezer, this is the temperature for the second freezer. I don't see a lot of spikes in terms of temperature or humidity. Everything seems to be a little bit stable. If I change to Chicago, you can see that I have higher spikes in the second freezer. So, sorry. Yeah, the second freezer. So you can see the temperature is -20 and then it's 50. So definitely something is wrong with this freezer. In the guidance we have, we're not just walking you through how to look at this, but we're walking you through how to create an alert when the temperature or the humidity reaches a specific value, so that you can use Azure Monitor to do this kind of alert and alert the store manager or alert someone that something is wrong and people can take action. So it's an end-to-end scenario to visualize and how to act upon the insights that you get using the technology stack that is available through Azure and other open source solutions. So this is a couple of scenarios in terms of the freezer monitor and the data pipeline. I'll go back to my client machine. And when you open Edge, you're going to find that we have some bookmarks available for you. So first, let me show you the POS application. So I'm going to look at the customer view. So this is the application that I have. Actually, let me just open the dev one. Okay, so this is the application that we have. Again, I've been talking about avocados for a lot, so I'm going to buy a bunch of avocados. And as you can see, there is something missing in this application. I have to click on the cart to see how many items I've bought and the total price that I'm paying. Usually, if you're shopping online, you would see here in the nav bar a card showing the total amount that you're going to pay and the items that you're going to pay for. So we walk you through this experience as a developer that you're tasked to add this functionality in the nav bar. So everything that I'm going to do is in the guidance so that you can do it later. So what we do here is we're going to walk you through as a developer to edit the code. So if I go to developer POS, let me just. Okay. And if I go to the code of the nav bar, this is the bar at the top. You're going to find that we have the code for you. So it's just commented. This code is going to just add a checkout functionality that would show you the number of items and the total price. So we don't ask you to write the code for it. It's not an exam, but we walk you through going to the source code and just uncommenting this piece of code. So this is what I'm going to do. Okay. So as a developer, I've added this functionality as a navbar. And as you can see, I'm a developer. I'm just working in VS Code with code. I don't care about AKS Edge Essentials or AKS. I don't care about clusters. All I need to do is just edit my code. And I'm going to say add checkout in navbar. And I'm going to push my code to GitHub. I've already created a branch for this. So I'm going to go to my GitHub repository to see this change. So I can see that new change has been pushed. And I'm going to create a pull request. Sorry, I did. Let me do the pull request against the right place. Yep. Okay, so just changed 2 files. And then I'm going to create a pull request, adding navbar, and merge this pull request. So as a developer, I'm just testing this on my local cluster. This is the application that I was just showing you. So this is just testing. I've not pushed this to the Chicago cluster or the Seattle cluster. I'm just doing this on my dev cluster. As you can see, as soon as I merge this pull request, there is a GitHub action that actually runs. And what it does is that it basically promotes this image. So this application is basically a Docker image or Docker container. So with this new code, a new image is being built. I'm logging into Azure Container Registry, build the image, add a new tag or a new version to this application, push this to the container registry, run some unit tests, and then publish this image so that automatically through Arc-enabled Kubernetes, my application is pushed to the cluster. So now, as a developer, all I need to do is write the code, push it to source control, and that's it. GitHub Actions through CI/CD takes care of building the application, doing testing, making sure everything is okay, pushing this to an Azure Container Registry, and then using the GitOps configuration done on the clusters, they discover that there is a new version of the application using something called Flux, and automatically push the new bits of the application and deploy it on my cluster. So after this happens, as a developer, I'm going to be able to see that my new functionality automatically has been added here. Of course, this is going to just take a couple of seconds to finish. So if there are any questions I can answer, Gregor, while waiting for this.
Yeah, someone, I may have asked a question, but I think Luke's answered it, but I'll flash it up anyway.
Okay, let me look at it.
Are you able to see that?
Yes. So the question is, where does Azure Arc stop? As in, where does it make sense to use Arc and when to use native cloud tools like AWS and GCP? That's a great question. So I would say that each cloud provider has their own tools, as you said, native cloud tools. But what if you have clusters, just in the context of Kubernetes, what if you have clusters across the 3 platforms? How do you do security? How do you do DevOps as we're talking? So how to control RBAC across the clusters in different platforms? How do you secure and monitor the security and the threats for all of the clusters across the platforms? This is where Azure Arc brings value, where you just look at one place, regardless where the clusters are there, you use consistent set of tools, you use your existing skill set. You don't need to learn a bunch of stuff, and you just basically have one control plane for your clusters, regardless where they're located. So if you're just using, let's say, AWS or Google Cloud or on-prem, you don't have any other cloud, you're not using any other platform, then Arc might not make sense. But if you have multiple ones, then Arc definitely makes sense to standardize how you do management and security.
Cool, awesome. That was it in terms of questions.
Okay, that's perfect timing. Yeah, it's done. So now if I refresh, so you can see I've done nothing. Actually, as a developer, I just push my code, and as you can see, the functionality automatically has been integrated into my dev application. As a developer, I've not touched the production. So if I go to the production, you can see I don't see this feature. As a developer, I'm going to have to go through different cycles, different testing to bring this to the other sites or the other clusters. And in the guidance on the JumpStart project, it's going to walk you how to do this and deploy this across all of the clusters. So conscious time, I'm not going to do this for all, but I'm going to show you the second demo, which is the queue monitoring application. So as you can see here, this is the queue. You can see that the store is getting busier with people probably buying avocados. As a store manager, I can see an inventory of the products that I have, and then I have this live view. So this is a video feed within the store that is showing people or customers in the store, and it's using AI to count how many people that we have in the store. So as people start to come into the store, you're going to find that this number increases. So this allows the store manager to say, yeah, we need another queue. We need to open another queue. We have lots of people coming into the store. So this capability is integrated in the queue monitoring experience. Within the documentation, it's going to walk you through how to enable and disable this feature. So you can see this is for the local dev cluster. If I open, for example, Seattle for the manager view, I don't have this live view. So through the guidance, we're going to walk you through the task of now we want to enable this, how to do this, again, through version control, through GitHub. So we're going to walk you through the how to do this from GitHub on specific cluster, how to enable this, again, by just changing a flag and using the technology stack of Flux and GitOps to propagate this across the different clusters. This is usually how customers manage and deploy their applications from edge to cloud. This is how they deploy their applications. This is how they manage the features that they provide in their applications. So there are usually flags where we need to enable this feature in this cluster or this site or this store, and we need to disable it on this store. So this is the integrated experience that you would see across Agora. There are other scenarios, as I mentioned, in terms of monitoring the infrastructure. This is the last thing that I'm going to talk about. We're using Grafana because Grafana is now the industry standard in terms of observability and monitoring. So as you can see, we already created dashboards for you in Grafana. Again, they're open source. You can use, you can customize, but just to show you the Kubernetes dashboard that we've built for you. So here you can see the performance of your Kubernetes clusters. You can see the number of nodes, the number of namespaces, the running pods, lots of different visualizations that helps the Contoso supermarket infra people or cluster admins to be able to monitor the performance of their clusters. So you're going to find other dashboards that are very useful in terms of, sorry, this is the same dashboard. You're going to find the freezer monitoring. If you as a store manager, I'll be better looking at the data explorer, but as infra, maybe I'm going to use the Grafana to understand what's happening. So yeah, that's mainly a glimpse of what you would get inside of Agora. All of those scenarios and demos are something that you'll be able to exactly do what I've done. Of course, the demo of the DevOps that did not work, you're going to be able to make it work, and you're going to see how to do this. So this is what I wanted to show you today. As I said at the beginning, the JumpStart project is always welcoming contributions. We have lots and lots of visitors per month. We have lots of GitHub issues being created. We have lots of discussions on our GitHub repository. So as you play with it, with either the scenarios, Arcbox, Agora, if you find an issue, if you have a feature or idea in mind, just submit an issue, and we're always looking at it. We're always making it better. So that's in a nutshell the Azure Arc JumpStart project and what we offer there.
Seif, that was amazing. Like, absolutely awesome. Yeah, I'm just going to put up a couple of comments. So yeah, awesome session. Thank you. So thank you very much from Zidane. And Ahmed said, so basically I have multiple teams, each working on different cloud platforms. And Azure Arc would be the overarching tool to manage and maintain it all. Love it.
Correct.
Awesome session. Yeah, that was amazing. There's a lot of stuff. That was a lot of content to cover. I think everyone, if you haven't learned something on this call, I would be absolutely amazed. That was fantastic. You did like 1 hour, 24 minutes of talking. That was impressive on its own. A couple of things I wanted to mention. If you want to reach out to or even look at Seif's blog, that's his blog there. So that's seifbassem.com. If you want to go to the Azure JumpStart, that's the website there. The Azure Arc YouTube channel is that one there, but you'll get that from this link as well. And lastly, but not least, you can follow Seif on Twitter here. Thank you very much, sir. That was amazing. I have always wanted to look at this, and I am absolutely going to. Yeah, so let me just get rid of that banner. Let me just get rid of that. So we've got one more comment from, yeah. So I'm so excited about Azure Arc. Yeah, awesome job.
Yes.
Yeah, very cool indeed. Before you go, there was one thing I wanted to say to everyone who's watching. First of all, thanks for watching. Thanks for all the great questions. Hello to everyone who is watching. And the one thing I wanted to say just before we go, I'm running the, we're running, I say we're running the Festive Tech Calendar again this year. So even for you, Seif, if you want to do a session on Azure Arc, feel free to fill that in. The Festive Tech Calendar runs for the whole month of December. Anyone who submits a session gets in. So everyone's accepted. Obviously only one session. So if you put 3 in, we'll have to pick one. But we're doing it every day in December. So if anyone wants to do anything on Azure Arc, you might beat Seif to it. So hopefully everyone who's watching has learned something. Seif, that was amazing again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregor.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us all the way from Egypt. Perfect. And before we go, I'll just play the little outro video. I've got another stream in a couple of weeks' time with Wim, Matthias, and let me just I can't remember what he's talking about, but I'll have more. I'll put some links out once we're doing that. I'm kind of slowing down on the streaming because it's taking its toll on me. I'm getting a bit tired in the old days. Right. Okay, so before we go, let me just play the outro video. Seif, stay there. I want to have a quick word with you before you go, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone, for watching.